My name is Evelyn Hart, and at 70 I believed I had learned the shapes of surprise. I was wrong. On a bright Saturday in Carmel Valley, the river low and glassy from late summer, I steered my little hatchback along the sycamores until my house came into view, the single-story stucco, with a blue door I had paid for brick by careful brick after my husband died. I wasn't arriving for myself. I was arriving for June, my granddaughter, who was turning 10 and had requested the cake with strawberries that shine. I had baked that cake 3 nights in a row to get it right. The kind of pink that blushes rather than screams a whisper of lemon in the crumberries laid like small jewels. I imagined stepping through the gate, June throwing her arms around my neck the way her hair always smells faintly of apples. I imagined candles, laughter, 100 tiny good things lining up to say yes. There were 3 oversized SUVs nose to tail in my gravel drive as though the house had been invited to host a car commercial. Music thumped so hard the panes in the front windows sobbed against their caulking. My rosemary hedge, which I had trained for a decade, was flattened by folding chairs and damp towels. Paper cups toddled in the breeze like white beetles. Someone had tied a helium balloon to the bronze door knocker, my door knocker, a swallow with spread wings. It banged its head against the wood in time with the bass. I balanced the cake box on one hip and let myself in. Strangers had colonized the entryway, toes kicked out of sandals bottles sweating into my woven baskets. Citrus-scented cleaner fought with cheap perfume and a smell of something charred. The living room I had painted the color of rainlight was now hot with bodies and neon napkins. A man I didn't know was sitting in my favorite chair, the one upholstered in gray herringbone, telling a loud story and slapping his knee as if it were his. At the center of it all, Bianca, my daughter-in-law, stood at the kitchen island wearing my indigo smock. I had stitched that smock myself from a retired curtain-wide pockets crossback straps, a little line of hand embroidery at the hem. Now the strap cut diagonally across Bianca's sequined top. She raised a bottle to pour sparkling water into flutes and scolded a child for wiping fingers on the counter with a voice that rang like polished metal. She looked up and saw me. The smile on her face sharpened to a blade. "Evelyn," she said over the music as if tasting something too sweet. "What are you doing here?" I eased the cake onto the counter's edge. "It's June's birthday," I said, and because no one lowered the music, I had to repeat it. "It's June's birthday." Bianca didn't move aside to give me room. Her mouth tilted an expression I had learned meant many things and none of them welcome. "We've got the food handled," she said. "There's, not really space for extras. Why don't you sit in the sunroom if you're tired?" Tired. The word clanged. I was not tired. I was an hour early and in tires. I glanced past her at the sheet cake glittering with 10 white candles. The icing read, "Happy 10th June and family" in swooped gold letters. The nickname June had for me, Nana Evie, was nowhere, although I had learned to expect absence. A small girl with pigtails I didn't recognize leaned close to blow on the unlit candles as though practicing. A woman I had never met told her to wait until the parents said so. "Where's June?" I asked. "Outside with her friends," Bianca said, already turning to the cluster of women beside her. "She's busy. We don't want her overwhelmed. You know how she is." I brought the cake she asked for. Bianca's eyes slid to the box and back to my face. "We have cake," she said brightly. "We have enough of everything." Behind her, a cousin of hers, Sarah, I think, had a phone, lifted chest-high camera, pointing steadily as if a documentary were in progress. Her thumb flicked across the screen while she smirked toward me, conspiratorial with whoever was on the other end. I stood still. I centered my breath. I reminded myself that a person cannot be forced to perform humiliation unless she agrees to be the music. The house was not large, but it was particular. Every corner had a story I could retrieve with my fingertips. That knowledge rose against the sheer unfamiliarity of the afternoon like water pressed to glass. My dining table oak oval, the one my husband and I had bought secondhand and refinished in our garage, was buried beneath paper tablecloths printed with confetti. Sweat rings ate at the surface where a dozen chilled cans had been set down without coasters. My blue-white mixing bowl, the one I used only for bread, held a harvest of plastic forks. A man balanced a plate on the piano lid I had paid to tune every spring. Grease spotted the polish. "Please," I said, and found I didn't know exactly what I was asking for. Permission to be the grandmother. Permission to exist. Bianca, hearing none of that, smiled toward her circle, then raised her voice toward me, not unkind but cutting all the same. "There's a seat in the corner," she repeated. "You'll see the kids when they come in to sing." I did as she asked and moved toward the corner of my own living room. A boy in a superhero cape ran headlong into me and bounced away. His father chuckled and saluted without apology. Music thickened the air, something with a chorus built for shouting. My fig tree, the one Marcus had planted the August he came home from his first real job, stood just outside the window, its leaves tar green and whispering. I pressed my hand to the wall and thought hold. When my husband Oliver died, I was 48. It felt then as though someone had taken the color slider and dragged it down to gray. Our son Marcus was 24 and working nights unloading trucks while trying to finish his degree by morning. I went back to the library 2 towns over and asked for extra hours. When those were not enough, I indexed legal briefs for a retired attorney at his kitchen table, squinting at onion skin pages as the clock wandered past midnight. I taught 3 siblings from the neighborhood to read in the afternoons and made small, careful money binding journals from cast-off leather. I learned the cost of concrete by the yard. I learned to translate permits into action. On my days off, I walked the lots on the ridge above the valley and stood in dust and wind to imagine a rectangle of shade and a door exactly where the light turned patient at 4 p.m. The parcel I wanted had a crooked live oak bent as if listening. Beyond it, a slice of river flashed like a blade between reeds. The salesman told me the grade would be punishing. I told him I had done harder. Marcus was there on the weekends at the start. He shouldered sacks of lime and carried them like sleeping children. He knelt to set a small fig sapling where I marked the soil with my heel. One day he said, his voice earnest and unpracticed, "I'll show my kids this tree and brag that my mother built a house with her hands." I kept those words in my pocket the way sailors used to keep salt, something to knock on when the horizon turned ugly. We hung drywall and learned just how heavy silence is before paint. I chose the particular gray of the living room because it made morning light look like mercy. We argued over grout lines and laughed in sawdust, and when the keys were finally ours, we stood in the doorway without crossing and cried a little, both of us. "We did it, Mom," he said. "We made a home." Now 10 years later, voices I did not know ricocheted off those walls. Someone leaned against the corridor where we had penciled measurements. The penciled marks were gone beneath fresh white. A framed photo of Oliver and me that used to sit on the console table was face down under a stack of paper napkins. Tape flags marked the cabinets as if cataloging what belonged to whom. I recognized Bianca's handwriting on the flags, "Spices, Snacks, Cleaning." The word "linens" was stuck crooked on the door of the hall closet, where I had folded quilts until they made their own gravity. I found my hands shaking, then discovered the calm beneath the tremor, the kind of calm that knows how to walk through smoke. I straightened the apron string at Bianca's back because it had twisted out of habit more than kindness. She didn't notice. A woman next to her laughed too loudly at nothing. Another adjusted her lipstick in the reflection of my oven door. June's laughter lifted briefly from the yard and dropped away again, bright and far, and it steadied me the way a bell steadies a field of cattle you remember where the center is. "Evelyn," a neighbor poked his head in from the patio. "Good to see you." He meant it, I think, but he didn't move toward me. He moved toward the drink tub to fish for a beer. I let my gaze catalog what mattered, so my mind would not snag on what didn't. The blue door needed retouching. The hydrangeas I had cut this morning still drank from a tall jar in the sink. One blossom had bruised brown around the rim. The hallway rug was bunched like a wave after many feet had trod it crooked. Near the piano, someone had left a tiny ballet slipper, not June's size. Some other child's foot had flicked it off mid-chase. "Bianca," I said quietly, because I wanted to keep the pronouncing of her name from becoming a weapon. "When there's a pause, I'll say hello to June." She didn't look at me. She smiled at the woman to her left and said, "We'll see," in a voice so bright it hurt. I waited. I did not look at the golden script on the store-bought cake again. I did not look at the phone aimed like a slow, friendly gun. I looked at the fig tree and remembered the exact depth of the hole we dug that August, the smell of new soil and sun fade. I let my eyes water, and then I let them stop. I smoothed the edge of the paper tablecloth with my palm so it wouldn't snag on the oak. I stood in my own corner and refused to vanish. The baseline kept punching through the drywall until it felt like a second pulse. I stood at the edge of my own living room, counted 4 steady breaths, and let my hands slip from the paper tablecloth. I did not announce where I was going. I carried the cake box to the far counter out of reach and drifted down the hall as if I needed a quieter light to see by. The study door stuck the way it always had in humid weather, a tiny catch at the latch, then a sigh. I was ready for the familiar relief of cedar polish and paper dust. Instead, a fume of balloon rubber and body spray. Streamers grazed the ceiling fan blades. A stack of disposable plates listed beside my ledger books. The chair where I pay bills had a glittery guest sweatshirt flung over it, sleeves inside out as if someone had shed it in motion. On the desk, under a plastic knife still streaked with icing, lay a manila folder I didn't recognize. My name, Evelyn L. Hart, was printed on a sticker at the tab in a cursive that tried to pass as official. I opened it. The first page wore a clinic header I'd never seen: Seaside Cognitive and Memory Center. Beneath it, a neurocognitive assessment. I had not taken declaring significant impairment and declining executive function consistent with dementia. In the margins, a doctor's signature looped like an actor's autograph, Carter Vale, MD. The language was brisk, pre-chewed. It described an interview in a room I could picture only because I've spent decades picturing rooms. It did not describe me. The second document was thicker, weighted with stamps and attachments, a petition to transfer title to my house into my son's name, Marcus Hart, for guardianship purposes. The paragraph spoke softly about family welfare and minimizing administrative burdens, until a sentence stiffened, property may be listed promptly to address pressing obligations. A paperclip held a post-it like something you tear off in a hurry list, at $420K. Call Zoe at Harbor Realty, quick sale. The handwriting leaned forward. Bianca's. I didn't feel the floor tilt so much as I heard a small internal click like a door locking 2 rooms away. My desk drawers had been rifled. The top left, where I keep stamps and receipts, was open just enough to look surprised. The velvet tray from the little mahogany box, where I nest the earrings Oliver bought me for our 20th year, was blank as an erased sentence. The earrings themselves were not there. A rubber band held a bundle of photographs starring everyone but me, Bianca's sister Sarah, tossing her hair on my terrace, an aunt I'd never met raising a flute in my kitchen, a caption written in looping pink, weekend at our river place. I touched the edge of one print and felt sugar grit from the icing knife dust my thumb. Down the hall, someone began the first notes of Happy Birthday in a key too high, and the children grabbed the pitch as if it were a rope, tugging it into disorder. I stood very still and let the song pass through the house like weather. I slipped the folder into my tote, then folded the fake assessment and the petition flat once, twice, until they made a snug rectangle under my palm. I took photographs of every page with my phone, leaned close to frame the clinic header, the signature, the dates, the notary stamp that tried to look solemn. I photographed Bianca's sticky note last. The lens snagged the loops of the yucca and the AK the way a needle catches a thread. There was a balloon tied to the back of my desk chair, its knot chewed by someone's teeth. I untied it and let it bump against the ceiling, then drift toward the door, curious where it would choose to go. I closed the window I always keep cracked for the fig tree. I turned off the ceiling fan and set the glittery sweatshirt neatly on the guest bed down the hall, because neatness has been my private prayer since before I had the words for prayer. Then I left. In the kitchen, Bianca laughed with her head tipped back as a woman I didn't know told a joke I didn't get. The store-bought cake shone under the pendants, a perfect corporate sky of frosting. I picked up my own cake box, heavy and honest the way food is honest, and set it gently in the refrigerator. I didn't write a note. I didn't need anyone to feel the virtue of my restraint. At the door, the swallow knocker butted softly against the wood as if it wanted to go with me. I gave it one finger a tap, not a farewell, just a mark that said I was here, and stepped into sunlight. On the drive down Carmel Valley Road, the oaks threw nets of shadow across the pavement. Pine pitch warmed in the heat. I watched for cyclists. I watched for my own hands tightening on the wheel and told them to soften. When I turned onto the lane for the Riverside Motor Inn, the painted blue wave on the sign looked tired, the way paint looks when it's been leaned on by several summers. I parked under a fig that wasn't mine and carried my tote past the humming ice machine to the lobby. The clerk, a girl with a silver ring in her eyebrow and a book spread face down beneath the register, sat up straighter when she saw me. Checking in. For a night, I said. Maybe 2. Her eyes flicked to my tote, as if it might explain something. We've got it downstairs by the snack machine. That will do. The room smelled faintly of lemon and old carpet. The mattress had a dip that knew other spines. I set the tote on the desk, lined up the papers, and tried to sleep. When the ceiling wouldn't stop moving, I sat up and made a list on the motel notepad, the kind with a stock photo of the coastline in washed-out blue house documents. Clinic call, jewelry count, bank, photos. I put a checkbox beside each because I have always liked the honesty of a small square conceding what it cannot hide. I checked my phone. Sarah's social media brimmed with stories, a slow pan across my terrace captioned, "Perfect light in our place." A child cannonballing into a rented kiddie pool. Bianca's arm flashing that indigo smock as she lifted a tray of hors d'oeuvres she hadn't made. I recorded the screen once, twice, in case the post crept away. I saved the files to the AirDrop folder I use for recipes and photographs of the garden. The quiet made me more awake. At 5:42 a.m., I gave up on sleep. I showered, I pressed a blouse with the motel iron, and wiped an old coffee ring off my one good pair of flats. I thought about the blue door of my house and retouched it in my head in the time it took for the iron to scald and cool and scald again. When the bank opened, I was waiting on the steps with my tote hugged against my ribs like a parcel of bread. Coastal First Credit Union has windows that mirror the oaks outside, so you always carry trees with you when you walk in. Amelia Navarre, the branch manager, has known me since the year after Oliver died, when I brought in a shoebox of rolled coins and a question about CD ladders. She came out from behind her desk when she saw me. "Ms. Hart, I didn't expect. Are you all right?" "I need to see my balances," I said, "and I need something in writing." Her mouth softened, but she didn't coo. Of course. Come sit. We went through the ritual ID, the hum of the printer spooling up, her careful fingers flicking the corners of the pages to stack them straight. She turned her monitor toward me, saving CDs checking. The numbers were what I expected them to be because I have never let them surprise me, steady and modest and enough to feel the ground. I also need a letter, I said, saying I'm the sole signatory on my accounts. That I manage them, that I have, for I looked up at the ceiling as if the years might be written there a long time. Amelia nodded. We can state the facts. We know that you are the sole owner and signatory, that you conduct transactions without assistance, that there have been no flags for confusion or third-party control. We can't make medical assessments, but we can describe what we observe in the course of business. That's all I ask. And she hesitated. Is this about the house? It is about being able to speak for myself. Her lips thinned in a way that meant anger carefully leashed. She opened a drawer and took out a letterhead with the bank's blue wave. I'll write it now, and if you want, there's someone I trust. She slid a business card from a holder and laid it beside my statements. Miriam J. Cho, attorney at law. Under her name, Elder and Family Property Matters. She's direct, Amelia said, and she doesn't scare easy. I thanked her. The letter came back quickly, 2 paragraphs signed with a firm and unflourished A. Navarre. She slid an envelope across the desk. There's a copy for your records. And Ms. Hart, if anyone calls asking questions that don't sound right, we'll let you know, and we won't answer until we see you. I went out into the light with my tote heavier and my shoulders less so. The courthouse square in town was already stirring, the fountain turned slow in the morning, and a pair of teenagers clapped at something a dog did on the grass. Attorney Cho's office sat above a florist that kept an iron bucket of peonies on the sidewalk, even this late in the season, as if the sight of abundance could keep it going. The waiting room smelled faintly of paper and lemon balm. A receptionist in a navy cardigan glanced at my envelope and nodded as if to say she recognized the particular weight of paper like that. Ms. Hart, Ms. Cho can see you. Miriam Cho was a woman in her early 60s with hair streaked iron and white, cut close to her head. Eyes that went to work and didn't apologize. She stood to shake my hand. Her palm was dry and cool. Tell me everything, she said, and her voice had the sound of a door closing you in and keeping you safe. I told it. I told the living room with strangers propped against my piano. I told the indigo smock on Bianca's sequins. I told the study with its balloon bumping uselessly at the ceiling. I laid the printed assessment on her desk, then the petition, then Amelia's letter and the screen captures I'd made of Sarah's Our Place. I slid across my phone and let the video play. I kept my mouth still when Bianca's laugh filled the office like a draft. Ms. Cho took notes in a narrow hand. When she paused for very long, it was to underline. She did not gasp. She did not look around for someone to share the outrage with. When she finished reading, she stacked the papers with the edges married, then lifted the petition again and tapped the notary seal with the end of her pen. Forgery, she said quietly. Fraud. Financial abuse of an elder. Entering and using property without consent. Will address title first. The rest will follow the paper. She asked questions that belonged to a person who believes in sequence, who had keys where the spares were kept. Whether I had security cameras, I did not when I last saw certain jewelry. I told her about the velvet tray glaring empty in the mahogany box. I told her I do not mislay earrings. Do you have photographs of the house as you keep it? She asked. I have 1,000, I said, and her mouth shifted as though I had answered correctly. We printed 12. Her paralegal, Owen, appeared like a quiet magician with a small flatbed scanner and a stapler that bit down with satisfaction. He wore a tie patterned with small cranes and the expression of someone who knows this isn't a rehearsal. He placed a notary journal on the desk while Ms. Cho explained what I'd be signing and exactly why. She was careful with the verbs, declare, affirm, attach. I read every page even when my hands knew where to put my initials before my eyes finished their work. We talked through the clinic header on the assessment. Ms. Cho dialed the number on the page and put the call on speaker. A woman answered in a lilt that could have sold anything. When Ms. Cho asked for Dr. Vale's availability to discuss my assessment, the woman paused the length of a mouse crossing a floor, then offered to take a message. We ended the call polite and complete. Ms. Cho wrote a note to herself, subpoena records. Then she wrote another complaint to medical board. Owen slid a thin blue folder across the desk. Tabs labeled in his neat small print. Deed account letter, petition copy, assessment copy, exhibits, AL. He tucked in a sheet of instructions that did not talk down to me. I paid the retainer at the counter with a cashier's check and put the receipt where I could see its edge. My signature looked like itself. Before I left, Ms. Cho asked for my phone again and scrolled to the photos of the battered rosemary hedge, the folding chairs that had made their own tyranny in my yard, the grease smear on the piano lid. These are good, she said, not as praise so much as a diagnosis. Time-stamped is better. I showed her how the phone stamped the moment in the corner of each image. Owen nodded, shifted one photograph 2 inches to the left on the glass, scanned stapled. When I stepped back onto the sidewalk, the sun had gone from shy to certain. People carried coffee and small dogs past the florist's bucket. A man in a suit said into his phone, "Yes, I can get there," and then laughed as if that yes made him new. I stood still for a minute to let my eyes stop reading. At the stationery shop 2 doors down, I bought a narrow binder with a cloth spine and a package of the clear sleeves that make evidence look like it knows its place. In the motel room, I slid each page in as if I were cataloging a seed collection assessment petition, bank letter, deed copy, photographs, screenshots. I wrote the dates in the corner in pencil because pencil is humility made useful. I called the library and told the afternoon coordinator I wouldn't make my volunteer shift voice steady as a level. I turned off the television that someone had left at a fixed loudness. I wiped the plastic ice bucket with a paper towel because it was sticky in a way that didn't belong to any story I wanted to live inside. I boiled water for tea in the room's microwave and poured it into the stiff paper cup they provided as if it were fine porcelain. I set an alarm on my phone for the exact time I needed to stand up again and didn't look past it. When the alarm sounded, I put on the gray suit that makes me feel like a person who remembers. I smoothed the seam with the heel of my hand. I put the binder in my tote and held the tote by the handles as if it had bones. I opened the motel room door and stepped into heat that smelled like asphalt and eucalyptus and something metallic I could not name. A child in the room next door was telling someone a story about a birthday and a balloon. I let the door close with that careful motel click that means alive, not slammed. The blue wave on the credit union letterhead in my bag made a small crisp sound when I shifted my grip. The binder's spine pressed a line into my palm. I walked toward the parking lot with that line in my hand and the sense of a house in my chest, holding it square against the sun. The binder's spine pressed a steady seam into my palm as I crossed the motel lot and slid behind the wheel. I drove the route to my house the way a stitch remembers cloth, familiar taut without slack. Eucalyptus leaves skittered along the asphalt like green fish. The air had that bright, almost metallic taste that lives near the ocean. At the corner where the valley road dips toward the river, a black sedan flashed its blinker and fell in behind me. Miriam Cho stepped out when I parked along the curb, binder twinned to mine under her arm. A city deputy climbed from the second car, motion-clipped and economical. The swallow knocker winked on the blue door as if it too had been waiting. From the yard came the echo of yesterday balloons rasping one another, plastic on plastic, a tink of glass, voices pitched to the easy entitlement parties breed. Music bled from the open sliders, something with a beat, calibrated to keep people from noticing time. The rosemary hedge was flattened where the folding chairs had sat like small thrones. A paper banner drooped, happy still stuck. Birthday, half-torn letters hanging aslant in a way I felt in my ribs. Ms. Cho looked at me, then at the deputy. "Ready," she said. It wasn't a question that tested courage. It was a question that measured sequence. I nodded. We didn't ring. We knocked 3 firm professional raps that made the music hesitate. A woman I didn't know opened the door partway, her eyes flicking over Ms. Cho's suit, the deputy's badge then landing on my face with a look that failed to rearrange itself in time. "Good morning," Ms. Cho said. "I'm attorney Miriam J. Cho, legal representative for Ms. Evelyn Hart, the owner of this property. This is Deputy Rojas with the county." She held up a document in a clear sleeve as if she were teaching a careful class. "We're here to serve a notice to vacate for trespass and to confirm possession." The woman blinked, called over her shoulder, "Bianca." Bianca appeared in the frame like a concept pretending to be a person. Sequins at noon, eyebrows freshly decisive, my indigo smock cutting a diagonal across her dress as if to bind her to the room. When her eyes found my face, a smile formed and died between one breath and the next. "Evelyn," she said, "we're a bit in the middle." Ms. Cho didn't raise her voice. She lowered it, and somehow the room bent itself toward listening. "This notice pertains to all non-owners currently on site. Possession will revert immediately to Ms. Hart. The deputy will remain while you gather your personal effects. Items belonging to Ms. Hart remain here. You have 120 minutes. "Absolutely not." Bianca snapped, fresh color rising beneath her powder. "This is Marcus's house. We've been handling everything for months. You can't just—" Deputy Rojas lifted a clipboard and read from the deed copy, each word steady against the grain of Bianca's voice. "Parcel number 1374519, recorded owner Evelyn L. Hart. Taxes current, utilities in owner's name, no lease on file." He looked up. "Ma'am, you and your guests need to begin packing your belongings now. We'll accompany you." The room's confidence withdrew 2 inches as if air had been siphoned. The woman who had opened the door took a half step backward. Another muttered, "We should call someone." Phones materialized, each person suddenly on the cusp of being the one who knew what to do. A small body streaked past my legs and back again, cape flapping. Cake, the boy yelled. No one answered him. At the kitchen island, Sarah lifted her phone, camera red dot blinking at chest height. Live, she announced. We're live. The lens found Ms. Cho slid to Rojas, held too long on my face. Everyone is going to see how this family gets treated. This is Ms. Hart's private residence, Ms. Cho said, eyes still on Bianca, as if Sarah were a lamp. Your recording isn't consented to, Deputy. Ma'am, Rojas said to Sarah, polite like granite. Put the phone down and start packing your things. Don't film my face. Sarah's mouth made a sound that wasn't a word. She kept filming. Rojas didn't take her phone. He stepped forward just enough to make the camera catch his shoulder and nothing more interesting. Final request, he said. The phone dipped sullen into compliance. Bianca rallied, drawing herself to her full height. This is absurd, she said. You can't embarrass us at a child's party. Marcus, she called loud as if the syllables themselves could conjure him. Where is Marcus? A neighbor's voice drifted from the patio. He left to get ice. 20 minutes ago. Ms. Cho offered a neat, finished smile. He can meet us at the door, she said. Then to Bianca. Start with your clothes and devices. The deputy will supervise. Don't tell me, Bianca began, then stopped, the calculations visible and not yielding. She turned to the cluster of women behind her. Pack, she said. Now. Chaos has its own etiquette. It arrived with drawstring bags, the slap of flip-flops, the sharp grief of a balloon popping a child's pout, a rhythmic with sniffles. I stood out of the way and let Ms. Cho be the one gravity bent toward. Deputy Rojas moved through rooms as if he knew how much force a door could tolerate before it felt like harm. He opened the hall closet where Bianca's sticky label linens lilted crooked. Towels tumbled. He made a neat stack that wasn't for them. I walked into the living room and turned off the music. The sudden quiet had grain to it. Somewhere far a dog barked twice in objection. I lifted the piano lid an inch and wiped the grease smear with the corner of a paper napkin, then tucked the napkin away like a piece of evidence I might need to remember. On the console table, I righted the framed photograph of Oliver and me. A faint ring of moisture had printed itself onto the glass. I rubbed it away with the fabric inside my jacket cuff. June's voice floated in from the yard, bright mid-laughter, then pulled away as if someone had tugged it by a ribbon. I didn't step into the doorway. I didn't call for her. I held my place while adults learned what place meant. 27 minutes in, because time started meaning something. Again, once the music stopped, Marcus's car screeched into the gravel. He came around the hood too fast, his tie already abandoned shirt electrified with sweat. He nearly ran into Rojas and halted, a hand up like a person meeting surf for the first time. What is? He saw me then, Ms. Cho, then the clipboard. Mom, he said, voice tilted toward boy. We can talk. Let's not. Ms. Cho held out a clear sleeve. Mr. Hart, she said, pleasant with edges. A copy of a petition filed without Ms. Hart's consent. And a cognitive assessment purportedly signed by Dr. Carter Vale. Both documents are under challenge. The deputy is here to secure Ms. Hart's home. Begin packing your family's belongings. Marcus didn't take the sleeve. His eyes went to Bianca. You told me this was... She cut him a glare. Handle it, she hissed through a smile for the room. Just handle it. He took the sleeve. His eyes skittered across the first page, found his own name flinched. He turned the second page. The edges of the clear plastic clicked against his thumbnail when his gaze caught on Bianca's slanted post-it list at 420K. Call Zoe. Quick sale. Something in his shoulders gave. For a breath it looked like a man preparing to kneel and then remembering there was no God in the room to make it worth the motion. He lifted his head. Mom, he said, and the vowel carried so much unspent apology it nearly toppled him. Bianca said the clinic. Look, can we step outside? We're not negotiating, Ms. Cho said. We're packing. She looked at Rojas. Please keep everyone focused. Rojas inclined his head, then addressed Marcus without impatience. Grab what's yours. Wallets, closed devices, nothing affixed to the house. Nothing that isn't clearly yours. Bianca crossed to the island and yanked at the apron as if it were suddenly burning her. The strap snagged on a sequin. Keep your old curtain, she said, ripping it free and throwing it toward me. I caught it because catching is a reflex no one has found a cure for. I folded it once, then again, and placed it on the back of a chair. Where are my earrings? I asked, almost conversational to the room, not to a person. The gold with the milky stones. Silence moved in and sat down. Bianca's mother face, done to a bright fear, pointed at the hallway. I saw a jewelry box, she said, as if the addition of a fact might make a friend. Rojas checked the bedroom with me, measured and methodical in his steps. The mahogany box lay open on the dresser like a mouth robbed of consonants. The velvet tray was still blank. He made a note. We'll list missing items, he said. His pen didn't hurry. Don't remove anything else from here until it's photographed. Bianca's voice rolled down the hall, still negotiating with a universe that had begun to ignore her. "You're humiliating your granddaughter," she called. "Is that the kind of memory you want for her?" Ms. Cho answered without leaving the kitchen. "We're securing a home," she said. "That's the memory." Marcus drifted into the bedroom doorframe and leaned his shoulder there as if it could decide whether to hold him. He looked younger than he had yesterday, which is to say, he looked like someone rehearsal had failed and performance had arrived anyway. "Mom," he said again quieter, "I messed up." I straightened the bedspread where someone had sat and pilled the fabric. "Gather your things," I said. "Deputy Rojas is keeping time." He nodded, emotion like swallowing something that hurt. Packing made a new soundscape drawer, skidding a suitcase's zipper, catching and releasing the peel of a child finding a lost sock and celebrating as if it were treasure. Out back, one of the balloons escaped and shouldered up into the hot, indifferent sky, bumping the fig tree, once on its way past. In the kitchen, Sarah tried to slip a blue-white mixing bowl into a tote. Ms. Cho's hand reached it at the same time. "No," Ms. Cho said with quiet interest, as if learning a new word. Sarah put it back. At 80 minutes, Bianca's voice thinned into an edge. "We're moving as fast as we can," she said, which might have been true in a physics sense and untrue in every other. 40 left, Rojas said. He did not weaponize politeness. He held it like a tool that had outlasted his employment. Neighbors accumulated like weather. Mrs. Ellison from across the street stood on her porch in cool linen hen, still a glass of water, tilting condensation down her wrist. The man with the labradoodle gave an embarrassed lift of his hand and pretended to be interested in his dog's collar. Through the sliders, I saw June on the far side of the yard. Arms crossed her bare feet, grinding lines into the dust. Another child offered her a strip of balloon ribbon. She looked, then looked away, a choosing I could not translate. I stayed where I was. I touched the doorframe with 3 fingers, index middle ring, quick like tasting. Rojas conducted a slow tour of rooms before the last quarter hour, pointing with an open palm. "Take your yes, the chargers. Not the lamp, not the table. Ma'am, leave the framed photos. Those are the owners. No, you can take your purse." He picked up a small knitted dolphin from under the sofa and passed it to a boy whose face unfolded with relief. The boy stuffed it into his backpack and grinned at everyone in range, unbothered by adult geographies. Bianca kept talking past the moment for talk, voice pitched to the stranger watching from a hypothetical balcony. "You're throwing out family," she said. "This is cruel. Everyone is seeing this. Everyone will know what you've done." No one answered her. The house answered her, the scuff of a suitcase wheel, the sigh of the refrigerator as it closed gently around my cake, the steady folded hum of Ms. Cho's presence, like a thing that doesn't need to prove it exists to keep existing. At 115 minutes, Bianca's mother carried a last plastic bin toward the door, then turned in the threshold and looked around as if she could memorize herself back into the space. "I like the way the light is in here," she said, a confession to no one and nothing. She left. Sarah hesitated by the blue door phone, latched to her palm thumb, hovering over the screen like a thought she couldn't stop thinking. She glanced at me, then away, then back, a flicker of the better angel that sometimes visits people at the wrong hour. She dropped her gaze and went out. Marcus stood in the kitchen with a duffel that sagged like a sentence missing its verb. He set it down and looked at me the way sons look at mothers when there are too many photographs and not enough explanations. "Do you want me to?" he began, caught by the impossibility of the next clause, and let the sentence die. He rubbed the back of his neck like the gesture might sand the past smoother. "Take your things," I said. "The deputy is waiting." His eyes glassed for a second and cleared. He lifted the duffel and went toward the door. At the hiss of the seal, he turned halfway back. "June loves you," he said, like leaving a candle where there isn't wind. He went out. Bianca was last. She had packed more than she owned and less than she wanted. She paused at the threshold and arranged her mouth into something she could live with. "We'll be in touch," she said, because the sentence made her feel like the person who got to decide whether the world called back. Ms. Cho stepped into the doorway beside her and looked past her shoulder into the yard, not at her face. "You're trespassing," she said. "Don't return without permission." Bianca gathered herself up, a person, lifting a dress from the floor without wanting to bend, and made for the SUV. The engine coughed, then agreed to live. The cars arranged themselves into a caravan that looked accidental and wasn't. Gravel spat. Dust lifted and thought about committing to air, then subsided. The deputy stood in the living room another minute after the last taillight vanished, as if listening for an echo that might advise him. "Ms. Hart," he said finally. Any hardness in his voice replaced by a simple practical layer. "We're clear. If anyone comes back without your say-so, call. If you find anything missing, make a list." "Thank you," I said. He wrote a case number on his card in stair-step numerals and left it on the piano lid, no grease left to catch it. "Congratulations," he said, not celebratory exactly, just a word that knows the size of what it names. He touched the brim of a hat he wasn't wearing and went out. Silence came in and stayed. The house exhaled every room, dropping the way bodies do when the person they've been holding themselves for finally leaves. A ribbon skated across the floor, chasing its own curl. I opened the sliders. Heat walked in and shouldered the old smells toward the yard. Ms. Cho set her binder on the island and pulled a clean legal pad from the pocket, the kind with a faint green line that persuades order. "We'll photograph everything as it is," she said. "Then you can decide what you want to address first." Her pen's cap clicked once. She didn't look at my face to read it. She looked at the fig tree as if understanding that would tell her all she needed to know about the angle of light. I took out my phone. We moved from room to room. Kitchen, the water rings, the misaligned drawer where someone had tugged too hard the blue-white bowl back in its exact cupboard, filmed as if it were a witness. Living room, the scuffed corner where a chair had worried the paint, the piano lid polished until it held a soft, honest reflection. Hall, the label ghosts where Bianca's tape had pulled up a sliver of my finished linens, still tilting like an accusation. Bedroom, the blank velvet tray, the jewelry box open mouth, the 2 sun-bleached squares on the dresser where framed photos had not sat all weekend. We stepped onto the terrace. The rosemary bore the geometry of stranger's weight. I ran my hands over it, and the herb forgave the impression. The banner sighed, letter Y holding a stubborn loop. I pulled the tape, rolled the paper, set it gently in the recycle bin. The fig tree flicked shade across my arm. The leaf's underside felt like skin. Across the fence, Mrs. Ellison lifted her glass slightly in my direction, an offering without the arrogance of advice. I nodded back. "Anything else you want recorded before I go?" Ms. Cho asked. I looked around. The swallow knocker lay against the blue door, a little nick bright where it hit. I lifted it and let it settle once a kiss. That's all I said. She closed her pad with the finality of a zipper. "I'll check in later," she said, and left me a folder containing exactly what my hands already knew I had. At the threshold, she paused. "Drink some water," she said, which was the sort of instruction that names a body and lets it be one. When the door clicked behind her, the house and I faced each other like 2 people at the end of an old argument neither had asked for. In the refrigerator, the strawberry cake waited steady as a truth no one had believed, and that did not care. I set it on the counter, lifted the lid, breathed the calm of sugar. On the oak table, I spread a towel and laid out the few plates that had survived the weekend's careless enthusiasm. I filled a glass at the sink. The water ran shock-cold clean. I carried the glass to the terrace and sat on the step with my shoes off. Gravel printed the soft of my feet, a temporary reminder. The rosemary breathed. The banner was gone. The valley air moved, the way it does at midday, slower with a weight that notices itself. Inside, the blue door held. I drank the water. I set the empty glass beside me and listened until the rooms found their own quiet and settled into it like a well-made bed. I finished the glass of water on the terrace and went back inside. The quiet felt like a sheet shaken once and left to fall. I opened every window. Heat carried the smell of rosemary through the rooms until the old aromas loosened and drifted out over the yard. By late afternoon, I had a list drawer by drawer, room by room. The piano bench needed reupholstering. The hall paint had a thumbnail gouge where a suitcase had bit. In the bedroom, the mahogany jewelry box stayed open, its velvet tray, still a blank you could fall into. I wrote the earrings description the way you would describe a person for a missing poster, pale opal centers warm as milk. Gold hooks that never bored the lobes. I photographed the empty tray again, then the faint oval of dust, where a frame picture had not been. A crew arrived the next morning with buckets and lemon oil. They moved like people who know how to give things back their names. One of them unscrewed the register from the floor vent and shook out confetti in a paper straw. Another lifted couch cushions, brushed away grit, turned each cushion as if dealing a new hand. By noon, the house smelled of wood, warmed to its proper self. Ms. Cho met me after binder under her arm hair damp at the edges from the walk across the square. We sat at the dining table, now bare oak again. She placed an orderly stack of papers between us. Titles confirmed, she said. Deputy Rojas filed his report. We've submitted your declaration with exhibits. Her fingertip tapped each tab. Exhibit A, photographs. B, screenshots from Sarah's live stream and story. C, the petition. D, the assessment with Seaside Cognitive and Memory Center at the top. On Wednesday, a letter arrived from the county office of the district attorney acknowledging the complaint. An investigator called that afternoon voice. Even questions measured who had keys, who had posted the Our Place videos, what had been moved, what was missing. The call lasted 11 minutes. When we hung up, the house felt steadier, as if a beam you cannot see had been pushed back into position. The clinic returned a fax the next day. Dr. Carter Vale would not speak by phone, it said. Any inquiry should be addressed to counsel. Ms. Cho handwrote subpoena records and signature logs across a yellow page and slid it beneath a paperweight shaped like a river stone. A week later, a curt email from the medical board stamped a phrase I read twice: interim suspension. I did not celebrate. I set the email in the binder where it belonged. 2 of my missing things appeared in places that weren't mine. The mixing bowl tried to leave once more in a cousin's tote when she returned for a pair of sunglasses. Ms. Cho's palm and a quiet no escorted it home. The earrings surfaced behind glass at a pawn counter across town, logged under vintage opal. The clerk checked IDs against Deputy Rojas's paper, then slid a form across the counter without commentary. I signed. He put the earrings in a small square of tissue, then in a box the color of cardinals. Back at my dresser, I set them on the velvet tray and closed the lid. It made the sound of a book finishing a sentence. At the courthouse, there was a morning where the air conditioning had too much ambition and the carpet wanted to be ocean. Ms. Cho and I sat in the second row. Across the aisle, Marcus stared at his hands. Bianca stared at the wall as if it were a camera she could instruct. The judge read without flourish, protective order granted. Restitution ordered. Probation set. When we filed out, the hallway smelled faintly of coffee and old paper. Marcus met my eyes as if stepping over water and said simply, "I'm sorry." I didn't answer. Sometimes there is no word that doesn't become a tool the wrong hands will pick up. Practical things reasserted themselves. I had the locks changed. I put the deed and the binder in a bank safe deposit box and kept copies in the file drawer with the old tax returns. Amelia at the credit union added a note to my accounts: no third-party inquiries without in-person confirmation. She showed me how to set an alert that made my phone sing if anything unusual stirred. Her ring caught the light and made a little ladder on the desk. The front door needed attention. I sanded the blue, wiped the dust with a damp cloth until the rag came away pale, then laid on a new coat with slow strokes so the color could decide itself. While the paint cured, I cleaned the swallow knocker with a cotton swab, working into the creases where time candied. When I tapped it gently, it sounded like confidence. Ms. Cho recommended a colleague 2 floors down who handled estate documents. I sat in a small office that smelled of paper and mint and answered precise questions, beneficiaries, contingencies, the way I wanted the house to be used when I had no more use for it. The clause we wrote fit like a garment made with the right measurements: the front room to remain a reading room afternoons open to neighborhood kids for homework, a table for board games, and quiet competitions of concentration shelves marked by hand. I signed in a room that hummed and returned home with a copy in a folder the color of wheat. The garden came back 1 hour at a time. I trimmed the rosemary where it had learned the shape of folding chairs. I mulched the base of the fig and decided against staking the thin branch that leaned toward the light. It had chosen, and it was strong enough to live with the choice. In the late sun, the shadows of leaves wrote on the stucco, and the swallows traded lines above the river the way boys used to trade baseball cards. When June came, she arrived at a run, thin knees, nicked ponytail ungovernable. She stopped at the blue door as if a bell you couldn't hear had rung. I opened before she knocked. "Nana," she said, breathless, and kissed my cheek like children learn from watching kind strangers. She smelled like clean sweat and apples. "I can't stay long," she added, as if time were a polite guest, but Mom said it's okay to visit. On the counter, the strawberry cake gleamed, not for a crowd, just for the number of people the room could tell the truth to. I cut a slice and set it in front of her on the plate, with the thin blue ring, the one that makes every dessert look like it has manners. She took a bite, closed her eyes as if conferring with a judge inside her, and nodded. "This is the one," she said. We carried our plates to the terrace. June swung her legs, heel-tapping the step in a code I didn't know. "Can I see the tree?" she asked. We walked to the fig. I showed her where the roots pushed the dirt up like a breathing thing, where the leaves polished the light on their own. She reached for a branch, then stopped with her hand hovering. "Will it hurt?" she asked. "It doesn't mind," I said. "It likes being noticed." She touched the underside of a leaf with her finger and smiled when the skin met the fine nap. Somewhere on the far side of the fence, Mrs. Ellison's wind chime counted a breeze. We stood there watching nothing hurry. Back inside, June washed her hands and dried them on the towel with the embroidered swallows. She turned the knocker once, not to make it sound, just to feel its hinge. At the door, she hugged me a second time tighter. "Bye, Nana," she said. "Thank you for cake." After she left the house, held the warmth of her voice as if voices could be weather. I stacked the plates, rinsed, the knife slid the remainder of the cake under its dome. Evening leaned in through the sliders. The blue door cooled to its true color. I walked from room to room, closing the windows I'd opened, turning each latch with the small, satisfying certainty of something returned to where it belongs. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.